Welcome to our webinar that's covering how to work with blueprints. My name is Dina Fallick from the Marks Group, and this webinar was recorded on October 11th, 2019. So welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to cover how to work with blueprints in Zoho CRM. If you have any questions while we're on the webinar, you can go to the questions box. I'm going to leave that open. If it makes sense, I'll answer the question during the webinar. Otherwise, I will follow up at the end, and at the end we can stay on for some questions and answers. And I will probably go about 45 minutes or so, and then we can just answer any questions and then go from there. Just as a reminder, we do have an extensive video library at marksgrouplive.com, and we're always adding to it. Our goal now is to add a number of videos each month, about 5 or so. And we're very open to what topics you want to hear and see. So you can feel free to email either me directly at dina@marksgroup.net or support@marksgrouplive.com. So I'm going to turn my webcam off so that we can focus on the screen itself now. Okay, so let me just go back into my video. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be covering working with blueprints. And these are the topics that we're going to cover today. First, we're going to start with what is a blueprint. And then we'll get into more of what you can do with a blueprint, what the basic building blocks of a blueprint are. And then I'm going to move into Zoho itself, and I'm going to show you what a blueprint looks like, both from the user perspective and for the person creating it, and then how to actually create a blueprint. And if there's anything else that you want to see or hear regarding blueprints, you can feel free to put it in the question box, and I will gladly cover more. We do have individual videos in the video library that go into blueprints. And again, any other details on blueprints that you think would be helpful to learn from, we're glad to go and do that as well. So let's start with what is a blueprint. As you can see on the left, I have a flowchart, and that basically is what a blueprint is. It's an online replica of an offline process. So at each step in a process, there's usually different things that someone needs to complete before they can move on to the next process. And what the benefit of having a blueprint in Zoho is that you can ensure, for instance, if someone wants to qualify a lead, maybe you need, there's a certain piece of data that you always need them to capture. You can force them through this blueprint to not be able to move to the next stage in the process until they put that piece of information in. So basically, it just guides the user on what actions they need to take and how to work through a process. So what can you do with a blueprint? There's actually a lot of things you can do. You can decide that at certain stages in a process, let's say in its approval stage, you need to make sure somebody, whether they're a user or not of the actual record that you have, that you need them to do something at that stage. So you can make sure that you associate them with that stage so they can take the action they need. As I mentioned, you can guide people through the execution of a process so they know what they need to do at each step. You can also, related to that, is mandate and validate important information. For instance, maybe you only move to a certain stage if you have $50,000 in revenue. So you can require that the user put that revenue amount into Zoho, and then you can validate that it meets the requirements to move through the process. And then finally, you can automate routine actions. Let's say after a lead reaches a certain stage that you want a task to go for someone to follow up on something. You can automate that task creation so that it automatically goes to whoever needs to manage that task. So as you can see, there's a lot you can do with a blueprint, and we can create all different types of uses for it. And I'll show you a couple once we get into the Zoho CRM itself. So what are the building blocks of a blueprint? You'll see these in action, but basically there's two important things, stages and transitions. And stages are actually the steps in a process. And typically you can create a blueprint on any field that has pick list options, because then you can require what's needed for each pick list option. For instance, lead status, you can have the qualified stage, you can have information needed stage, you can have waiting for a decision stage, you can have a closed won stage, you can have a closed lost stage, and we'll go through those in a little bit more detail. And then there's the transitions, and the transitions are basically what conditions need to be met in order to move from one state to another. So for instance, if we need a certain piece of data, getting that data is a transition from one stage to another. And you'll see when we get in that it's actually, the transition is the action you need somebody to take, and there's an actual button in Zoho in the record for the user to make sure they act on before they move to the next state. So now just drilling down a little bit more on transitions, what you're going to see is that there's certain actions you can take before the transition, during the transition, or after the transition. So before the transition, the most important thing you could possibly do is define who's responsible for it. So if you're a user of a record and you are the one who has access to that record, but you need an action to be taken by someone else who's using Zoho, who may not have access to the record, you can make an action before the transition that will actually transfer that record for a specific action to another user. During the transition, that's where you can require certain pieces of information, validate conditions, and basically update a field, different things like that. And then after the transition, that's where you can set the actions to be automated. So now you can say, now that we moved into this new transition, let's set a task for somebody so they remember that they have to do something, or you have to send an email to someone saying this has now been complete, something like that. And we'll go through all of this. This is just to give you a little bit of background before we go. So now I'm going to change screens, and we're going to go into, oops, let me just switch into, get a new tab up, sorry about that. Okay, so now we're in the home page, and this is for our test Zoho environment. So there may be things that look a little bit different in your version of Zoho, but just to make it clear, you can customize any of this, and you will see what we can do. So just to give you an example of what a let's go into a contact actually. What a blueprint looks like. If we go into a oops, that's not a good one. Let me go into a deal. Oh, sorry about that. This one's not a good one. I know we have it in quotes, so let me go to quotes here. So here is where for the user, they will see a current state, and they'll see what stage they're in. And you can also see that down in the quote stage here. And because there's a blueprint tied to this field, you will see that the field is locked because nothing can happen until you take care of whatever the transition here. And in this case, the transition is to attach a quote. And when you click on that button, you can see here what you need to do. We put a note here, and it gives you the option to attach the quote. So just wanted to first give you an understanding of what this looks like. So now we're going to go over here to the toolbar, and this is where you're going to go to create to start working with blueprints. So when you come over here, you're going to go down to process management, and you're going to see that blueprint is right here. And when you select that, you can see that we already have a number of different blueprints created. and that you could see you can have them for the different modules. You can actually filter so you only see which blueprints have to do with the modules that you're looking at. And then you can see in this case it's leads. You can make blueprints for specific layouts. And then again, it's based on a field, and you can see in this case for the leads, all of the blueprints are created on the lead status field. You can see when they've last been modified, and then you can make them inactive or active. And if I go back here and show all modules, I just want to show you. So here we have deals, that's based on the stage. We have some a task process, which is based on the status, solutions, quotes, where it's based on the quote stage. So you can see that there's a lot of different modules that you can create blueprints for. So just to go in and show you what a blueprint looks like when you're creating it, I'm just going to go and show you. Here is the lead nurturing process that we have. And if you go over here in the gray part, you can see that we can have a description. So this is showing you again, it's in the leads module. It's based on the standard layout, and the field that it's on is the lead status. You can also, if you wanted to, add a criteria. So for instance, you can pick a field, let's say, like I was saying before, annual revenue, and you can say, for instance, that it has to be, $50,000, and you can save that. So this blueprint would only work when the annual revenue for the lead is at $50,000. I'm just going to take that out for now. Done. We'll just leave it actually. Okay. So then we have here in the white boxes, these are the stages. And as you can see, we're basically creating a flow chart, and we'll show you how to do it in a couple of minutes. So these are the stages, and these are the stages that were brought in for this process. Over here, you see available states. These are the stages within the lead status field that were not brought in for this process. So you can make this only apply for certain stages, so you can choose how you want to do it. And then these green or the blue boxes are the transitions. So basically what you're saying is, before you get to the not contacted, we want to gather some details. And you can click on the transition and then see, here's what I was speaking about before. You have the before, so you can choose which record owner owns the responsibility to gather the details. Then during, you can make notes mandatory, make attachments mandatory. Here we made a message, so gather basic details about lead you're trying to establish communication with. So that will appear when you go and create a new lead. And then you can create an email. In this case, we have rules around email, phone, and city to add those fields in. And then you can see here, if we do the add, you can add update a field, you can create a message, add some associated items, or even do a checklist. So you can make a checklist so you can make sure that people are following a process that needs to be followed. So if we go out, so here you can see that we're tying, so after gather details, then they can moves into creating the record and it's not contacted. And then as you try and contact the lead, you can either say no answer and it moves into attempted to contact. You've tried again. And once you finally establish contact, that's when you move to the next transition before you can move to the contacted. And within established contact, you can see here, there's a message that will say, good, that you have established communication. And then there's some information that you'll be required to fill in, such as the number of employees, annual revenue, and industry. And one thing that's important to note is that in this case, you could see that established, contacted, and not interested are both in blue. And what that means is that these are what's called here common transitions. If you unclick that, they become green, or at least in this case, the established contact. In this case, by by clicking on the common transition, it means that it can be the transition that happens in between more than one state, and you can show which states you want it to happen in. In this case, an easier example to explain is not interested. This is because you can contact the lead, and they could say they're not interested, and you would move to the lost lead, and you could right away, or you can contact them and or you can move into the pre-qualified. You're starting the process there, and then eventually they could say, you know what, I'm not interested, and you would go to lost lead. So essentially, the not interested is a transition that can happen at any point during the process. So you can decide whether it's a common transition that applies to multiple states, or like in green, these are just regular transitions that is what's required to move from one state to the other. And as you can see, you can move into a number of different stages. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, go back to all modules, and then I'm going to show you just the quotes, just so you can see one a little bit different. And in this case, you want to drag it down. You can move these. You can do a lot of different things with this one. So in this case, we have the quotes module. The layout is standard, and the field is quote stage. So what you're seeing here is that you're starting with the draft, and this could be at some other point. The draft is approved, and then you move into the negotiation phase. And then you have to finalize the draft, and here you want to make notes mandatory. Once you make the notes mandatory, you can move to closed one, and then all finalized. During that transition, we don't really have any action. And during the finalized, let's see if we have a we don't have one here, but I'm going to go in and show you. But this just shows that there's different things you can do at the different stages. We can always add another one. Maybe we want on hold, finalizing the draft, and maybe we want to add in another one. We can do that as well. But let's go now and let's create a new blueprint so that we can go ahead. Sorry, I'm just looking. Oh, good, Connie. I'm glad you're going to like this. I just took a quick look what in the questions. So if we go back here, we're going to create a new blueprint. So you're going to click on this Create Blueprint box, and then you're going to have to name name this. So I'm going to do this from the deal blueprint, and then and you can name it anything, but I'm going to tie this to the deals module. And then you can choose, if you had more than one layout in deals, it would show you that, and you can choose which layout. In this case, we only have standard, so we're going to do that. And then you're going to choose the field. So here, what this is showing you is that these are the fields that are eligible based on being pickless. And if you go here and you click on that I next to choose field, you can see here that it says it needs to be a field with a pick list value. So we'll just choose stage. And then again, as I showed you before, you can do certain criteria based on one of the other fields you have in the deal module. I'm going to leave this for now, and I'm just going to go next. And then this is where it's now showing you on the left, on the right here, all of the fields, all of the states that you can set this process for. So you click on it and you drag it over, and you drag it into the box to start with. Qualification, you're going to want the needs analysis, value proposition, identify decision makers. I'm going to make this with closed a proposal, negotiation review, then closed one, and you just close lost, and close lost to competition. So now we have our states here, and now we need to connect them. So qualification, let's say that needs to go to needs analysis. So once you're going to qualify, and then we'll create these after. And then after the needs analysis, you can create the value proposition. And then once you're done with that, let's just say we're just going to do this pretty straightforward. We're going to do this, and then you can just play around with the boxes to make them align better. And then after you identify the decision makers, then you know who you can create your quote for. And once you give them the quote, there's some negotiation and review. And then this is where, after the negotiation and review, you could probably move in 3 different directions. You can move to close won, you can move to close lost, or you can move to close lost to the competition. And maybe just based on the way I did my arrows, let's just move these down. So you can do a lot of different things with this. So now we have what our states here, just checking if you have any more questions now. So now we have our states here, and now these red pluses here, these are the transitions that we now have to define. And here's where what you now need to think about is, what do you want to happen from the qualification to the needs analysis? So maybe what you want to do is contact, maybe it's have discussion with contact. No, you're limited. So let's just say contact talk. And you could say talk with the contact on what they want with this new deal. And you can press save. And then this is where you can then define the actions before, during, and after. So in this case, we want to keep this with the record owner, so we're not going to go ahead and change things. But if you wanted to, you could see, you can choose another either role or user, but we're not going to do that here. During, we want to, what do we want to do? We want to say in here, maybe we want to send a message that says, please speak with the contact to see what they are interested in buying. So you can add that. Oops. And then let's say we want to make a note mandatory. So we know that, and then we can add to this, please make a note of what their needs are. And then what you can actually do is move this up. So maybe you want this to be before you require what the note field to look like. Then, so now you have this, so then they're going to contact, and then they're going to go into the needs analysis, and maybe then here, value, create just create value, I'll say. And here say, based on their needs, create the value for them. Press save. And then in this case, in order to move from the needs analysis to value proposition, maybe here we want to make certain fields required. So we want to know from them what their amount is as a need. Let's see if there is any other. So let's just leave it as that for now. And maybe we can just put, we'll just leave that as the amount. And then after, we can maybe create a task where it says create value proposition as a reminder to the user. So maybe in 3 days, we want to make sure that they get a reminder to create that value proposition if they haven't done it. And in this case, we have a choice. We can assign this to someone else if it, let's say, was an approval process. But in this case, we want a reminder to the record owner who's working on this deal. So we don't have to put anything in the assign to, because if it's not, it will automatically be assigned to the owner. And then maybe we want to have a reminder, same as due date, and we can do it as an email or a pop-up. We'll do it as a pop-up. So when that user goes in 3 days, if they haven't created that value proposition yet, they'll be prompted to do so. Then we do done. So now in this case, with this create value, we have the during and we have the after. Then after that, we can say find decision maker. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. And during this, let me just move this over so it's a little, oops, go back in there. And then here, maybe we want to make a note and add a message. Make sure to find out who the decision makers are. You can add that. And again, I'm going to move that up so it's before the note where they have to add it. And then once they identify the decision maker, the next step would be that they're going to create the quote. And then in here, during, maybe we don't need anything for during, but maybe after we want to have another task to remind them to create the quote in case it gets to be, in case they change it to this and then don't make the quote. Again, and we'll do a remind, and we'll do an email this time. We'll do done. Now, we can go from propose. Once the proposal is done, then we have the negotiation review. So here, maybe it's just answer questions, because maybe you're just answering questions as they come in. And maybe in this case, we don't really, maybe in this case, again, we'll do a task just to get them to check in on quote, make that again, 3 days, reminder, pop up, done. And then once we're done, once we get to negotiation review, you can go in either of 3 ways. So in this case, the transition here is that we've won the deal. Maybe it's contact finance because they need to do something now. And then here it's to update. What they have to do here is maybe they have to update the amount, because maybe they make sure it's final, and the closing date based on whatever's there. And then you can always, I'm not going to actually do this here now, but you can then send an email notification to finance. So finance notification. You can choose who would get it. We don't want somebody, maybe I'll just do the owner just so we have something in there. You can do additional recipients who are not in Zoho. And this is where, if finance isn't on Zoho, you'd still be able to give this to them. And then you would select an email template. So for now, just to be able to have something there, I'm going to just do the deal has been approved and then done. So that way you now have an email notification going to finance. And then if they decide, I'm just going to move this over, if they decide that if they've lost it to the competition, update competition and update, I'll just do update reason. So here what you want to do then in this case is we're going to want to make the note mandatory, and let's put a message here and we'll say please explain which competitor won the deal and why. You can add that, so then they'll have to do it. And again, I'm going to move this up so they see that for that. And then you can do close lost as well. Maybe just say add reason here. And then we can do the same thing here, make a note mandatory. If we had a field for the loss reason, we could always just put it there. Please indicate lost reason. And you can just add that there. Oops. And then again, we'll move this up. So now that we've done this, I want to just show you, we've created this, but before we move on and I'll show it to you in action, what I want to show you is we talked before about common transitions. So at any point during this process, we know that we can lose the deal. So add reason would be a good one to put as a common transition, which, as you can see here, the way that flow chart worked, and I'll unclick it and click it again, you can see that the green arrows from every stage pointed to that and it turned blue. And then we can decide, do we need this for all states? We don't need it for the close loss to competition. But other than that one, and we don't really need it for identify decision makers, but we'll leave it for all of the other ones. So it's a common transition now that applies to all of the different, to a number of the different stages. And then I'll show you that in action. So once you do this, you can do two things. You can save it as a draft, just so you don't lose it. And you have it right here. And then if we go into it and we're fine with it, you can also publish it. Once you publish it, here's where you see it as an active status. And then now let's go and see this in action. So if we go to the deals and let's create a new deal. And actually, I'm going to change this because we really should do it. It's easier to do it from an account or a contact. So I'm going to do it on this one called Family Co. And then from here, you can go to two places. I'm going to go here on the left where it says deals. I'm going to do the plus. And then I'm going to say sample deal. The required fields are, let's make it for next week. And then the stage for right now, I'll just do it in qualification and then we'll move through and I'll show you how this works. Save this. Now you can see that the sample deal is in here. So now what I want to do is click on the deal. And here's where you can actually, you know what, now that I see this in play, I see sometimes something I should change. So the current state is qualification. And then the transitions here are the contact the person or add the reason here. But we really want to change this add the reason. This is where it's lost. So I'm going to actually go back into settings, go back into the blueprint, go into the blueprint. And then here, because this is really, we want this to be what, and I'm going to change this to lost deal. And then I'm going to republish it and it saves it for me. Now let's go back into the deal. And now you can see the qualification, the transitions are either the contact or the lose deal. So if we want to keep going, we said, please speak with the contact to see what they're interested in buying. Please make a note of what their needs are. And here's where we can say, they need to purchase 2 test products. Save it. And then once you do that, you can see that we've now moved into the needs analysis state. And again, just to show you, the stage here is needs analysis. And like I showed you before, it's locked because you have to take certain actions. So now we had said we had to create the value, or it was a lost deal. So just to show you the lost deal, this is where we could say, please indicate the lost reason. And then if we were to enter it, I'll just say price too high, then you can click on save. And then you'll see that the deal is now gone directly to the close lost field stage. Now what you can do is, let's go back in here. So let's go back to value proposition. Value proposition, you can see now it's find the decision maker or the lost deal. If we just do contact one, I'm just going to put something in there so you can see as we go through the process. Then identify decision makers. And actually, I realized I did something that's a little tricky here. And oops, forgot two things there. I just realized. So let's go back into this deal. The blueprint. And there's two things that I want to change in here. And this is where it gets a little tricky. So find the decision maker should really be before you move into the stage. So the create quote actually goes here. So what we want to do is here, we want to really change this to be, we actually never added anything for create quote. So first, what we want to do is we want to make an attachment mandatory because we want them to add the quote. And then we're going to put a message here and we're going to say, please attach the quote you want to send. You do. And like I always like to put the message above what you want to happen. But what we really want to do here is we want this create quote to happen between the proposal price quote and the negotiation. And this is where sometimes it gets tricky with the blueprints. So I'm actually going to say here instead, I'm going to change it now, make this add decision makers. And then instead of here, what I'm going to put in this message is make note of the decision makers. And then I'm going to change this to a note instead of that, add that. And then I'm going to go to answer questions. And this is where I'm going to make it create quote. And during this stage, I'm going to make an attachment, add a message, please attach quote. And again, I'm going to move this up there. And then I'm going to republish this. Go back into my deals, go to the sample deal. And then here now proposal, this makes more sense now. So sometimes what you really need to think about is when they get to a certain stage, what do you want them to do? And it's hard and it's tricky, and it seems is a common issue where you're sometimes thinking of what you need in the stage and you have to decide if it needs to be done before or after you're in the stage. But here now you can see we have create quote, please attach quote, and then you can go in and there's different ways that you can attach the quote, and then you can save it after that. Just checking again if any questions. So just to finish up, so this is how you do a blueprint. My recommendation is that when you start a blueprint, let me just go in again and just show you what my recommendation would be, is that what you really want to do is outline this process on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper and really think and make sure that once somebody hits the needs analysis stage, what do they need to do in that stage to then move to the next stage, and make sure that you're really defining what you need done from one stage to another, who you need to be involved, and what reminders you need to go out. And what I can show you is when we go back into here, we have set a task in here as a follow-up. So that's showing up here as well. So the tasks are important also. And here's where the task was to create the quote. And if you remember, this was for, I think, 3 days after the lead moved into that stage. So there's definitely a lot you can do with blueprints, and they really are good at helping you prompt the user to do what you need to do, and also to make sure that your processes are followed. So let me just show you one other thing, because one thing I also mentioned was the validations. So when you're in a blueprint, let's say we had in one of them, let me just see which one it was, which transition. Create value. I think we had amount in this one. Amount, so we had to do amount. So here, what you can also do is add a validation rule. So you can go plus validation, and you can say that the amount, maybe you want it to be, it has to be greater than $500,000. And then you can say, you can tell them this deal cannot be processed because the amount is too low. So that way you can prompt, you can put some controls in as well. If we republish this, go back into a deal, let's see, I'm going to actually, I'm going to create a new deal so you can see what we're doing. Deal name is new blueprint deal. I'll just pick an account. Close date, we'll do next week. Stage, so here now for the stage, I'm going to go to needs analysis, save, saying create value. So here it's requiring the amount. So I'm going to put in 100, and I'm going to save it. And it's going to come back and say this deal cannot be processed because the amount is too low. And what I should have done is put what that amount is that it had to be, but this is just to show you how you can put in validations and limit what somebody can do if they don't meet your policies, and you can really enforce your policies in here as well. I'm going to cancel that for now. So that's really the overview of what is involved in doing a blueprint. And what's involved, what it looks like for the user, how to create a blueprint, and the different ways that you can use it. I'm going to stay on for about another half hour or so, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, you can go in and play around with doing blueprints, and we do have several videos in our video library at marksgrouplive.com. And if you have any questions, you can email us at support@marksgrouplive.com, or also if you have any suggestions on what other things you'd like to see related to either blueprints or any other type of subject related to Zoho.